Howdy everybody, this is Omar, your Audio Amigo, here with another Audio Amigo review for y'all. Today is going to be part 2 of my Kiwi Ears doubleheader, featuring these shiny boys. These are the brand new Kiwi Ears Astral, a new 7-driver hybrid IEM priced at $300 US. With sparkly shells, a dynamic driver, 6 balanced armatures, and featuring Kiwi Ears' new modular cable, are the Astral just as bright and shiny as the Septet were? Let's see. As with last time, quick disclaimer, the Astral, like the Septet, was sent to me by Linsoul for review. I'm not being paid for this review, but because I could turn around and sell these if I really wanted to, I have gone ahead and activated the paid promotion feature here on YouTube. I do these disclaimers because I believe in full transparency when there's potential bias besides my own personal taste at play. Thank you so much to Linsoul for sending me these, and thank you all for your continued support. Unboxing experience on the Astral here is essentially identical to what was on the Septet. You get the same sort of IEM carrier with a ribbon pull and the case underneath. The case is the same, sort of semi-crush resistant with the soft interior and the little mesh pouch for holding tips, a dongle, or whatever else you may have. It's a fine case. It's basically pocket sized, not too huge. The zipper works well. Better than the ZGAT cases, that's for sure. The cable on here is modular, so you also get the 4.4 millimeter balance adapter in the box, which is nice. Unlike the Septet, you only get one set of ear tips. These are sort of standard bore silicone tips. You only get one set, but you also get replacement filters. This may seem like a small thing, but I really like it when sets include replacement filters. It helps with the longevity of your IEMs, and it means that it will last longer. Yeah, there's really only a $30 difference between the Astral and the Septet, and I think them having similar accessories like this is honestly fine. I do really like the replacement filters on the Astral, especially since I didn't really care for the way the wide body or the wide bore tips sounded on the Septet. So yeah, I would say well done, Kiwi Ears. Massive bonus points for the included replacement filters. Moving on to the cable, it's essentially the same as the one on the Septet, but in a different color, and it's essentially the same as the one that was on the Tekusai Lucid IEM, but with Kiwi Ears branding instead of Tekusai. You get the same sort of 4-wire twist and that very nice grayish sort of purpley color. Goes into 2-wire twists after the Y split. You have the same sort of long modular connector with the longer than normal, oops, dropped the cable there. Longer than normal modular connector. Again, it's indexed with the Kiwi Ears logo, making taking it on and putting it back on fairly easy. Hardware all matches, same contours on all the hardware there. Y split is nice and metal. The chin slider is again a bead type, which means it does its job well, slides up and down easily, and sits flush against the Y split. 2-pin connectors, once again, match everything else, have rather subdued stereo indicators that I wish were a bit more prevalent, and say it with me, why are you using non-recessed connectors on, why are you using recessed connectors on non-recessed shells? Again, it just makes it look clunky. How much nicer would it look if it was just flush against the surface of the IEM there? I'm going to keep complaining about it until it gets fixed. Not that I think it will get fixed. It's just it's a minor nitpick. Like with the Septet and the Lucid, for that matter, this is a good cable. It feels great in the hands. There's no real memory. You can get it to behave, lay flat really nicely. Well done, Kiwi Ears. Hope to see this cable on more sets in the future. So, design and build. Unlike the Septet and its all-metal build, the Astral is a more typical sort of full resin build with a very sort of semi-custom shape to it. The nozzles here are attached to the lower shells and feature those slot-like filters that we got replacements of earlier. The overall design reminds me a lot of the Kiwi Ears Punch. There's no ventilation on the inside of the IEM here. The only ventilation is this rather large vent hole there on the back. I'm assuming that there's a bass bypass tube 3D printed into here somewhere because I didn't experience driver flex or pressure buildup issues on the Astral here. The vent did its job, which is all you can really ask for. Yeah, like I said, the shape here, you've got a bit of a comfort wing. You've got a very prominent bulge here to help it sit in your ears a little bit better. You've got this indentation here. The nozzle is sort of offset to the side there with that little bulge. Yeah, it's we'll talk about the comfort later, but it's a semi-custom shape for sure. Resin quality is very good, as is expected of Kiwi Ears. I can't really see the seam where they added the top plate onto the bottom half of the shells there. I would expect these to last about as long as any other full resin IEM at this price point, maybe a little longer because, as I mentioned, it comes with replacement filters. Compared to the Septet and its 7 drivers of 4 different types, the specs on the Astral here are a much simpler affair. You still get 7 drivers, but you only get 2 different types. You get a single 10mm bioceramic diaphragm dynamic driver, as well as 6 custom balanced armatures to handle the rest of the frequency range. Nothing too fancy here. This driver combo is pretty easy to drive, with my cheap Android phone and older sources having 0 issues powering these to quite loud volumes. The nozzles here are a little short, so certain tips might not work as well for these, but the 6mm wide nozzles are a pretty good size that shouldn't cause discomfort. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Weight on these is just over 5 grams per side, and the overall weight is pretty low thanks to those all-resin shells, so in terms of everyday carry, shouldn't add too much to your pack weight. These do sound different when exposed to impedance adapters or higher output impedance sources. It is a subtle change, but I will detail it later. Overall, I would say pretty typical specs for a hybrid IEM, nothing too crazy. All right, let's go ahead and pull up the cool wall. Honestly, getting a little bit tired of this samey sort of glitter under resin shell design that so many IEMs at this price point just seem to have. After, you've seen 2 or 3 dozen of them, they all just start to look like craft fair projects. The Astral kinda escapes that description for me. At least the blue ones do. I'll pull a picture of the gold ones. They're just a little bit too one note for me. It's just like glue, glitter, done. Whereas these blue ones, at least the glitter is more heavily distributed towards the top and it sort of fades away at the bottom, kind of like something sinking away into water. Yeah, I like the look of it. These are just barely going to sneak into cool as far as I'm concerned. If I had been sent the gold versions, I think I would have stuck these in bland, but the blue has enough different color going on and enough of a textural difference between the top and the bottom that, yeah, these are going to go in cool. I feel like I've been getting less and less good at predicting the Council of Ladies, so without further ado, let's just go ahead and get into it. We'll start off with the gold versus blue to see what color works best for them, and it's a clean sweep in favor of blue. So it looks like I was vindicated in not liking the gold one as much. In terms of prettiness, we have a classic Lady Number 4 gatekeeping scenario of 4 pretties and 1 meh. Lady Number 4 doing her job well here. Same score in terms of compliments for wearing these, 4-1. So Lady Number 4 not really impressed with the Astral. Let's go ahead and check in on their thoughts for the Astral here. It seems like the blue sparkles do well with the ladies. The size of the shells do seem to be a bit of a concern for some of them, which I can agree with. Again, we'll talk about that in a second, as well as the tiny ears test. But it's overall very positive sentiments from the Council of Ladies for the Astral. I would say good work with the design here, Kiwi Ears. Keep mixing it up, though. In terms of comfort and wearability, for me, these were fine. The fit wasn't what I would say amazing for me, but it wasn't awful or bad either. I just had to spend maybe a little bit more time adjusting them into my ears than usual because of these shorter nozzles. My standard Spinfit W1 tips did get left behind in my ears a couple of times. The W1s have sort of a longer, wider stem on them, and these short, stubby tips, if I was really sort of twisting them in my ears, would just sort of let go. Not a super annoying problem for me. It happened maybe a handful of times in the 2 weeks that I've had these for testing. Just keep that in mind if you're going to be choosing tips for these. Pick something with smaller or shorter cores. Like I said, though, overall comfort was fine. I was able to wear these for long periods of time with no real issues in terms of pain or sensitivity. Just had to adjust them every now and then. As with all semi-custom shell designs, I would heavily suggest trialing these before you buy them. Like with my wife and her tiny ears test, these large protrusions and sort of bulbous designs meant that she couldn't form a seal with these at all. These got a score of laughably bad. They failed spectacularly. She was saying that these fit her far worse than any of the Zigat IEMs that she tried, which were already pretty bad. Yeah, as I said earlier, if you have a shell with a complex shape like this, definitely try before you buy. The fit is going to be highly dependent on your individual ears. But we'll go ahead and get started with the audio, kicking things off as usual with the bass. The Astral has a nice rumbly sub bass and good mid-bass punch and nice sort of kickiness to it that helps make those lower frequencies sound more fun and engaging without being overwhelming. Tiesto's Split collab with the Chainsmokers had nice rumble on the low end, and the mid bass was bouncy without becoming woolly or overly soft. Texture was overall very good, and I think that they chose a good dynamic driver to do the work in here. As we move up into the bass guitar and the kick drums, the Astral maintains the good energy and texture. The intro to 3 Days Grace's Animal I Have Become is basically a bass drum and a bass guitar just playing off of each other. And the impact and the growliness of the strings and the big drum skins on those drums just comes through very nicely on the Astral. Once the rest of the instruments come in, they don't completely get drowned out like they can in some more bass light sets. I would say the bass on the Astral here is boosted, but not really in a big or overcooked sort of way. A lot of the energy is in the sub bass, which is, keeps things nice and clean. Texture is very nice. The presentation overall, very smooth. Mids here on the Astral are very well executed and very clean. The mid bass isn't boosted to the point where it would start to tonally affect the lower mids, but the lower mids also aren't super lean or lacking in body. They have enough energy to sort of make them feel nice. David Bowie's Let's Dance is a good example. The lower notes on his voice can come across a bit thin in some sets that have a sort of dip in the lower mids and mid bass, not on the Astral. On the Astral, Bowie sounds nice and natural. He doesn't sound warmed up, but he doesn't sound sort of lean either. He doesn't sound as lush as he can on some warmer sets. This is a very natural replay. Instruments have good energy to them with the bass line on the song and the drums sounding nice and separated. No real masking going on, just a really good replay. Female vocals are forward in a way that's actually kind of nice. Reba's vocals in her rendition of Bobby Russell's The Night the Lights Went Out in Georgia, for example. The tonality is clear. The warmth in her voice doesn't go too far and turn into huskiness. Her higher notes don't become shouty. She's just forward enough in the mix to put a bit of a shine on the presentation without overwhelming the rest of the track. I would call the Astral a vocal forward set, but not necessarily a vocal focused set. The whole mid-range is overall quite nice. It's very tonally correct, and I don't really find it lacking in any major way. Just like the bass and the mids, the upper mids and treble are well balanced and very well executed. Female vocal harmonics are in service to the fundamentals. They don't take the focus away. They don't come across as shouty to me either. The harmonics flying off of Otto's voice in Take Me to the Beach with Imagine Dragons, I think, are really nice. Her breathiness and the sort of sudden pitch changes and borderline yodely notes that she hits, they decay very nicely. They don't become sibilant. They don't become fatiguing. They're just very, very well executed. They're showcased without being in your face. It's a very similar story with the percussion and instrument harmonics. When I say 808s, we tend to think of the bass drum on the 808, but the hi-hats and the cymbal sounds of the 808 I think are also very iconic. Falco's Vienna Calling, for example, that's pure 808 hi-hat and 808 cymbal, and they're going to town. The Astral showcases that sort of iconic tonality of those electronic cymbals very well, and there's a nice little airiness at the top end of the range. It is enough sort of extra air that I think that it might be fatiguing to people who are sensitive to the very top of the range, and on some tracks it did come across a little bit grainy or fuzzy, but it's not a deal breaker for me. It was mostly very clean and very well done. The upper mids and treble are sort of the finish to what I think is a very well balanced sort of all-round tuning. In terms of technical performance, I already called out the dynamic driver for being pretty good, but the Astral as a whole is a very good technical performer. Low-end details like the bass guitar in the back of the room in Charlie Parker's I've Got You Under My Skin come through very nicely despite being a little more understated in the recording. The sort of buzzy ringing of the strings and the texture of the fingers comes through very nicely on the Astral. As far as how the Astral does on my now becoming standard Waltz for Debbie Listen for the Glassware test, the Astral did pretty well. Some of the more subtle glass noises I had to kind of focus on to hear. Same goes for some of the quieter conversations in the background, but they were all there, just rendered sort of to different levels of clarity. In terms of overall technical performance, I would say the Astral matches or sort of trades blows with the Dunu DaVinci. It doesn't quite reach the AFUL Performer 7. Honestly, the more I listen to the Performer 7 in comparisons like this, I think it's more of an anomaly in terms of price to performance, in terms of pure resolving ability. The Astral is a fantastic performer, though. I think it did great with everything I threw at it. Stereo separation on the Astral is also very nice. The cymbal shift effect in Ted Nugent's Stranglehold travels very smoothly and quite widely from left to right in your ears. There's no point where you can hear it shifting from sort of left sound to middle sound to right sound like you can in some more closed-in sort of three blob sounding IEMs. As far as perceived 3D soundstage and imaging goes, the Astral will not hold back well-mastered tracks at all. Spanish Harlem Orchestra's Danzón for My Father sounds nice and open. You have the piano, the horns, the bass guitar. They all fill in the space neatly around you. The imaging performance here lets you point out sort of where the instruments are in the mix fairly easily, and I thought the track sounded very nice. Compared to the rest of the IEM sort of at this price point, I would say the Astral is about average in terms of stereo separation and perceived 3D soundstage, which isn't to say that it's bad. It's just that at this price point, there are a lot of great IEMs, which we'll see when we get to the comparisons. Quick word on that impedance adapter effect or higher output impedance on the Astral that I mentioned earlier. Go ahead and pull up the graph. There is an effect. It's extremely subtle. Of the very minor differences shown here on the graph, the only one I could really hear in A/B testing is the loss of that upper treble airiness. The bass boost I didn't feel was really noticeable unless you were A/Bing it like I was doing. I like the airiness on the Astral. I think it's one of the nice things about the tuning, so I personally wouldn't slap an impedance adapter on this. But if, like I said, you're sensitive to that upper treble sort of zinginess, maybe throw an impedance adapter on it. It could tame it down. So, to me, the Astral comes off as a sort of meta-ish sound signature. Meta itself being bass-boosted neutral. This, I think, has a bit more vocal emphasis than some of the more strictly meta-tuned sets and a bit less bass than some of the strictly tuned meta sets I've heard. What I've gone ahead and done is I've rounded up the meta-ish sets from sort of $200 to $400 for a bit of a comparison. While all of these are what I would call meta-ish, they all take very different approaches to bass and treble, which I think should be interesting. I also have the Performer 7 because I mentioned it earlier, and I know if I don't compare it, some of you guys are going to get a bit upset about that. So let's go ahead and get into it. We'll kick off the comparisons with this set's little sister, the Kiwi Ears KE4, priced at $200 US. In my review of the KE4, I called it sort of the IEM for the undecided because it's essentially a all-rounder, sort of do-everything good tuning without having any really glaring flaws. Is it perfect? No, but it's still a fantastic all-rounder, especially for the price. The Astral, I feel, is a very logical step up from the KE4 because to me, it addresses my two biggest problems with the KE4's tuning, those being the sort of softer, more woolly bass presentation and the rather understated female vocals. Yeah, the Astral has less bass punch and energy than the KE4, but the bass that you do get, I think, is tighter, faster, and more controlled, crucially less woolly when compared to the KE4. Female vocals on the Astral are more forward and overall nicer. You do trade off a bit of lower mids energy in exchange for that. The KE4 is just richer and warmer in the lower mids than the Astral does, but I wouldn't say the Astral sounds lean or thin by comparison. It's still nice. At $100 more than the KE4, you would expect the Astral to be the better set, and it is. But, if your budget's closer to $200, the KE4 is an extremely solid all-rounder choice. If you're wanting to spend $300 and you've sort of trialed and liked the KE4, the Astral is, as I said, a very logical step up. Okay, so now, even though I don't think it belongs super well here, I'm going to go ahead and bring in the Performer 7, priced at $240 US. I mentioned in my technicality section that the Performer 7 came off as more technical to my ears compared to the Astral. Just wanted to talk briefly about that. Performer 7 is more neutral than the Astral and by extension most of the things on this table. The bass quality is very similar compared to the Astral, but the Astral packs more bass quantity and has a bit more of that vocal forwardness compared to the Performer 7. Performer 7 has richer lower mids, a more even detailed treble presentation, and a bit more of that nice airy treble that I mentioned. Both of these sets are fantastic. If you found the Performer 7 fatiguing or bass light, I think the Astral is a great alternative. On the other hand, if you're looking for a sort of Goldilocks combination of really nice bass, resolution, detail retrieval, warmth, enough vocal forwardness to have things not sound recessed, I think the Performer 7 is an absolutely amazing value at $240. I really like this set, as y'all know. Next up, we have Timmy's collab with Dunu DaVinci, priced at $300 US, exactly the same as the Astral here. And this was one of the more interesting A-B comparisons in my testing, just based on how similar these two, but also how different these two can sound. Bass on the DaVinci is a similar story to the KE4. The Astral is that little bit tighter, that little bit more controlled. The DaVinci is punchier, more exciting. If you want something with more mid-bass excitement, I don't think that the DaVinci is as soft or as woolly as on the KE4, but it is a little bit softer than the Astral here. The DaVinci also comes across as a bit more sparkly in some parts of the treble compared to the Astral. It has a hair more treble energy in some places. It does not, however, have that nice airiness that the Astral can have that adds dimension to some tracks. In terms of overall resolution, as I mentioned in my technicality section, I don't think one set necessarily beats the other. I think they trade blows fairly well. If you want a bassier, more engaging sound with a bit even more vocal focus, go for the DaVinci. If you want something more controlled, a bit cleaner, a little bit more relaxing, I think the Astral is the way to go. Next up, we have what for me is a relative newcomer in that I just got this set in, and I do have a review coming, so don't worry. It is the highly requested and much hyped Softears Volume S, priced at $320 US. I will be talking about the Volume S and reviewing it in the low impedance mode, as that's the tuning that I personally prefer here. If the meta tuning as a whole is a sort of bass boosted neutral, then the Volume S is straight up neutral. It doesn't have the same sub-bass rumble or mid-bass slam that basically any other set on the table here has, but it's got a fantastic lower mid-range tonality that reminds me an awful lot of the lower mid-range on the Performer 7, which, as you know, I really like. The Volume S is vocal forward in a very similar way to the Astral, but it has a bit more of that harmonic energy to help the vocals really pop. Some people might find that a little bit shouty, but others will really dig that sort of extra tonality and energy that it has with female vocals. In terms of treble, the Astral is a bit sparklier in places, and it has more of that airy quality to it that I think really adds some dimension here. But the Volume S just sounds so effortless. It sounds natural. It sounds correct. Nothing is emphasized or out of place in the treble. It's just clean. That combined with the more subdued bass leads to what I think is a very nice overall neutral tonality. Again, if you want a more exciting sound, Astral is going to be a great choice. But if you want natural, more relaxed, sort of correct sound, the Volume S is honestly pretty awesome. Finally, we have the Moondrop X Dusk, recently priced increased to $400 US. Like the DaVinci and the Astral, the Dusk and the Astral was also a very interesting A-B session. I'm going to be using the default DSP tuning on the Dusk here, as it's essentially default DSP here, smoother, more refined, more resolving, more mature version of the Astral's tuning. Yeah, if the Astral was sort of a better, more mature version of the KE4 for $100 more, then the Dusk is a better, more mature, more refined version of the Astral for $100 more. Yeah, I will say the jump from KE4 to Astral is bigger than the jump from Astral to the Dusk. That's the realities of the hobby. You're going to get diminishing returns personally at whatever point you're going to start seeing them, and I just think that's how those jumps hash out here. Both of these IEMs are great. They're extremely similar. The Dusk is better, but again, it's $100 more, and it's packing, a different set of drivers here, so the tonality is a bit different. But yeah, both are great. I think this is worth the extra money, but this is still fantastic, and this is probably the better value if you're looking at these three in sort of a vacuum. That sort of spilled into my wrap-up a little bit, but let's go ahead and do the comparison wrap-up. KE4, still the benchmark for the meta-ish tuning at $200. Bass is a little soft, vocals are a little recessed, but it's still an amazing all-rounder. $100 more lets you clean up those issues and lands you at a choice between the cleaner, airier sounding Astral and the bassier, slightly sparkly Dunu DaVinci. If you move up a step above that, you have the Dusk and its DSP tuning, which is the top step of the ladder in sort of these four sort of meta ladder step up, if you will. If all of these sets are too bassy for you and you prefer something more natural, the Performer 7 can essentially match or exceed every set on this table in terms of overall detail resolution and detail retrieval, while still having great bass texture and presence. If the Performer 7 is too forward with its treble and it's still too bassy for you and you want something even more neutral, the Volume S is just a gorgeously wonderful, neutral sounding, correct sounding IEM with just a splash of color on female vocals and lower mids to make the listening experience engaging. I've said this with other comparisons in the past, but in 100% honesty, all the IEMs on this table are winners. If you own one of these sets, congratulations, you've got a great set of IEMs. That's enough about the other sets. Let's go back to the Astral and figure out where it's going to go on the Audio Amigo Arbitrary rating scale. I really like this set. There's only two real downsides for me here, one being the nozzles not holding on to my preferred ear tips 100% of the time. That's easily fixed with a tip swap. The other thing being the sort of shape of the shells, which had me adjusting it more often than I typically prefer in my ears. Everything else is extremely solid. You've got a good modular cable, a decent carrying case, replacement filters should yours get blocked or clogged in the future. Yeah, I wish it came with a nicer carrying case and some more options in the way of ear tips, but overall it's a good accessories package. The tuning is meta-ish in that the bass is a bit more controlled and the vocals are a bit more forward than the typical more meta-ish sound that we were used to seeing. I think it's a great step up from the KE4. I think it's a less bassy alternative to the DaVinci. I can see people calling this sort of a mini Dusk in terms of tuning. Yeah, it's a fantastic all-rounder. You can tell by the sets I'm comparing it to. This is going to go in, this is brilliant. I think if this had a more special unboxing experience with some better accessories, or was just packing a little bit more overall detail resolution and sort of detail retrieval to my ears in some tracks, I think I would have bumped it up to you should buy this. It's an extremely difficult bar to clear. I think the Astral is a fantastic IEM if you're shopping in this price range. Yeah, it's just very, very solid. I really like this one. That leads me rather neatly into the recommendation. Kiwi Ears Astral. It's a fantastic all-rounder with good sound quality and good looks. I can see bass heads, treble heads, and those people who want the absolute most technical performance out of an IEM for $300 being a little bit disappointed here. But if you're looking for an all-rounder at $300, this should 100% be on your short list. It trades blows with basically all the other meta-ish sets at or under this price range, and I think it makes for a really nice one-and-done IEM. If you have a sort of meta-ish set, not just the KE4, I think this makes a great upgrade from the other sort of meta-adjacent budget sets. If you have the Hexa, if you have the EW300, the Juzier Defiant, by the way, to me sounds vaguely meta-ish. If you have those three, if you have the KE4, and you're willing to spend, the extra money and get a good upgrade, I think the Astral is a fantastic piece of kit. We're getting more and more good IEMs in this $200 to $400 price range. It's becoming extremely competitive. I think we're going to start seeing this level of mature do-it-all tuning start to trickle down into the budget sets sooner rather than later. But with that wraps up my Kiwi Ears doubleheader. One IEM that I really liked and vibed with pretty well, and another that just honestly wasn't for me. But such is the way of Kiwi Ears. They have a lot of bangers, and they have some real head scratchers. Once again, I'd like to say thank you to Linsoul for sending both of these out for review. I do have an etude on the way, but it isn't here yet. Coming up next is the CVJ Shadowblade, and that one comes with a giveaway, so get excited for that. A lot of reviews coming through the pipeline. I've been super, super busy. I hope you all bear with me. I'm trying my absolute hardest to keep the review quality high while trying to bust out all this content. If I do make mistakes or the quality drops, I hope you'll understand. For now, though, that's going to be it. Thank you all for watching. Thank you all for your continued support. I hope you enjoyed the video. This has been Omar with Audio Amigo Reviews, and I'll catch y'all next time.